All right, we are live. The Welcome to the Winner Circle podcast is back after a brief summer hiatus, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce you all to the guest who I'm speaking to today. So, on today's episode, I interview the director of community engagement at Onnit in Austin, Texas, where he lives with his wife and three children. He is the creator of all the Steel Club Evolution workout programs and co-creator and producer of all the Onnit 6 workout programs, in addition to the Onnit and 30 online workout programs, as well as the Onnit Academy education courses and certifications. Welcome to the Winner Circle, Shane Heins.
Thank you very much, Derek. An absolute pleasure and honor to be here and to kick off this next round of Welcome to the Winner's Circle.
We last connected a bit of over a year ago, and since that time, a lot has changed. At that time, you were the director of fitness education at Onnit, and that has evolved into the director of community engagement. There's a lot of shifts there. Let's start with that. Let's talk about the evolution of your personal role, and then we'll get into the or your professional, and we'll also get into the personal.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So you and I have connected through the Onnit Fitness Education and the certifications and courses that myself and John Wolf put together and helped bring out into the world in cooperation with working with some amazing coaches along the way who helped us disseminate that information and bring a lot of value to each of those. And so that was the primary role that I had been brought to Onnit for, because historically Onnit started out as a supplement company, and that is still its main bread and butter, for lack of a better term. But as Aubrey Marcus, the founder of Onnit, was just excited about, and he always has been excited about, lots of different things and how do we incorporate these different elements into our lives. And so for him, the idea of training like a warrior and what that meant, and really attracted him to training with unconventional tools, things like clubs and maces and kettlebells and all the things. And that happened to be an area of specialty that myself and John were had. It was an area, we were subject matter experts in the area of unconventional training and fitness due to our previous years of experience. And he and I have had, the joy of knowing each other for a good number of years. We were just reflecting on it recently that it's been almost 17 years now. And so we've been down the road and up the mountains and through the valleys and continuing to bring forth our greatest service, whatever that is meant to be, through this avenue that we've found ourselves, which primarily has revolved around fitness. And so I got brought in for that, and serving as the director of fitness education and helping guide that process from, as you mentioned, our educational certification courses where you and I first met, and then as well as our online fitness programs, which are the Onnit 6 programs and the Onnit 30s, and kind of doing two things where there's like education and then production, and how do we create different entry points for different people depending on where they're at in their lives or how much they're able to engage at that time. Now, for me, a really big element of all the work that I do, and I think we've spoken about this a little bit even in the podcasts, but previous podcasts, but for me, a really important element of what I do is about elevating the human condition. It is about elevating our sense of purpose in our lives, our sense of connectivity with each other, and really working down this path of how do we realize our greatest potential over the course of our lives and this stage of it. And that for me was something that really manifested itself in my business before I came to Onnit, which was Dare to Evolve. And what was interesting was with Dare to Evolve, my approach while I was doing fitness, my approach really was about utilizing fitness as the vehicle to help us connect to our sense of total. If we were to think of mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, all of those elements. And the physical side, the like movement and fitness and connectivity to our body really always resonated with me. And I found that when I could help people or contribute or support people in connecting to a sense of freedom of movement through their physicality, that it tended to ripple out to those other elements of ourselves, mental, emotional, spiritual, and thereby supported this forward progress. That when we're working on the mental or the emotional or the spiritual, that's a very ethereal element of ourselves, and it's hard to really like grab a hold of that. Where, you know, we could be going around in circles and kind of going, am I really getting anywhere? Like, I don't know. And really, it's the reflection of being able to do it together, because none of us is really meant to do it alone, which is one of the beautiful things of Welcome to the Winner's Circle, is that you continue to provide a platform for people and ideas to connect, which triggers our ability to process the stuff that's inside, these more ethereal elements of, oh, where's this going? Whereas physical, we could drop any of us down for push-ups and start, give me 10. And you start, and very quickly you're like, I feel this now. And I either feel strong doing it or weak doing it. It starts highlighting where I might have pain or where I might have tension, where I feel limited in my range of motion. Like all these things all of a sudden spring up, and we can have an immediate direct correlation to where we're at. So it's a big leap for anyone who's like, listen, I'm just looking to get in shape. Like, I don't need this to get all woo-woo and everything. But at the same time, it's just a recognition of, all right, we just need you to start feeling better. And if you start feeling better in your body, then we're creating a container for you to be able to feel more comfortable and feel better or at ease or more purposeful or meaningful in connecting to those other elements of yourself. So that was my primary purpose with Dare to Evolve and everything that I've done through that. Even the Steel Club Evolution programs, it was a way of connecting on a deeper level. And the themes of each of those programs were meant like they were about connecting on a deeper level. And so coming to Onnit, there was a natural bridge and correlation that I did resonate with, because Onnit's overall theme is total human optimization. And I was like, I can get behind that. Total human. That's what I've been working towards. And being at Onnit has been an amazing gift to have met so many other people who also really resonate with that message and the idea of even just being in a space of being able to ask the question, what does it mean to be total human? And then what is a process of getting there or working towards it or getting closer? And that's that optimization idea. And so being in a space like this has just been, an absolute gift, and all the amazing people that I get to connect with. And so that brings me to, while curriculum development and program design and all of those things have revealed themselves to be a certain strength of mine, where I really, really thrive is in the connection with people. So it's always been a lot less about the fitness and more about whatever passion around fitness that I have is about helping create more accessible vehicles for people to tap into. And so there were certainly, over my first 7 years at Onnit, there were certainly periods of time that could be a grind. They were wearing, they weighed on me, they were heavy. I know a lot of folks that I've spoken to, they're like, oh my gosh, you're at like one of the meccas of fitness. Like it just must be unicorns and rainbows all the time. I'm like, no, I'm in this role of service and it is not easy. It's like actually a lot tougher and has been along the way. But I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot. And the gift of those challenges has been to help me step into whatever my continuing purpose is and whatever my continuing potential might be. And so despite those periods of times where things could, weigh and be heavy and be challenging and be a real grind getting through to create what we were creating, the connection with the people at Onnit, in the Onnit gym, the people who were passing through, like that was always really uplifting. And most especially when we ran the certifications and having people coming in from all over, and not just all over the US, but all over the world, from all walks of life, and to come together to, even if they didn't know what they were stepping into, they're just like, I need something different. And our message on the front end was this idea of unconventional. Break out of your norms, break out of how things are always done, and see if we can, find a crack and open that up and discover and explore new possibilities of what could be. And that, I think, really resonated with a lot of people personally. And I'm going to ask you a question here in a second, and I would love you to share a little bit of what that was for you.
Yeah.
But the idea coming into a certification for me was, it was absolutely exhausting on one level. Like when we were teaching, we were starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was at the office usually around 6:30 or 7, a couple hours before. I would review. This is what I preferred to do it. I could go off the cuff if I needed, but I just preferred to settle into a space, and I would even like say prayers just to make sure that I was being the best container or conduit for value for everyone who is making the effort to travel and to invest their money and their time in being here with us. And then, even though we said we would finish between, 5:30 or 6, it was not uncommon to go until 8 o'clock in the evening. And we always warned people in the front end. We're like, hey, we're going to get day one stuff done, no matter how late we need to stay. Buckle up and be ready. If you need to take snacks, take breaks, like you go for it. But we are committed to being here with you. We're not going to rush and wrap this up because 5 o'clock has come around. And so Saturday and Sunday, by the time we were done, what was always reaffirming for me that we were doing it right was by the time we were finished, no one wanted to leave. On Sunday, we're all sitting, reflecting, and soaking in and absorbing the experience of the weekend. And you could just feel it. Like we would have to come to a point and we're like, all right, time to head back out into the world. Like people didn't want to leave. And even though it was a lot of hours and needing to be a massive outpouring of energy to support everyone in that space, to give the information, to help people work through their stuff, I was always simultaneously absolutely like uplifted, revitalized. It's like doing the certifications was me plugging my cord back in to the socket and just going, and this would give me all the energy I needed to keep going with the other work of development and what we were doing. And so that to me was and has highlighted my more natural space, where my natural strengths do continue to come to the forefront. The other stuff I did because it served this, and the other stuff I did, I had to work to do it more efficiently and work hard to get better at it. Whereas just being in space and being able to connect and to deliver, to create an experience with a strong through line, that's where actually I come alive the most. And that's been really a really important reflection for me in this transition where, as things were coming to a natural wrap up of what it was we were doing previously as a step in contributing to Onnit as a whole, there was this, okay, so where do I go from here? If this is still the space I'm meant to be in, or like, where does that energy transition? And that ended up transitioning into Director of Community Engagement, which has taken a bit of time for me to shift into. But before I go any further with that, I'd love you to share a couple of your thoughts and what your experience was going into that space of a certification and all of us connecting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like as you talked there, I just reflected back upon like my favorite parts of the certification was not the fitness. It was like the community, and it was the spaces in between like the fitness, and I feel like the physical activity served as a means of getting people outside of their heads and into their hearts and their flow states, and just that place of oneness, that place of unity, and a place that they could connect. And that's what I really enjoyed most about the certifications, was just getting out of our heads and into our hearts, using fitness and physical activity and learning, and as the kind of push to that place, to that center. And I had like, yeah, the days were long, but those connections, whether that's like helping a partner with their technique or practice coaching or just talking with each other between the breaks, they always serve to fuel me, and the energy was so abundant during those weekend sessions. So
Awesome.
it's really neat that you transitioned into the director of community engagement, because I know that's like your skill. Like you're all about connection, and fitness is a tool that you use to create that connection. But connection is so beyond just a physical. It just one means there. Another way we could attend to the connection is through our spirituality, which we'll talk about with you and your Bahá'í Faith. Um, and then also the mental, just having like deep, meaningful conversations like we're doing here, sharing the presence with each other, connecting mentally. So it's another route to this unity. So it's neat how you went from more of a physical base to now like physical, mental, spiritual community.
Yeah, and that's beautifully put. And it's been interesting for me in that transition, because part of that, and part of the reframe I had to go to, was this idea of like, what did everything that we did for those first 7 years establish and is now serving? And so in many ways, I'm still very much at Onnit, like one of the fitness guy. And so people have questions around that, but it is a lot less about the nuts and bolts of like how to get fit, and more about bigger concept conversations around how do I incorporate fitness in general in my life with everything else that I'm trying to do. So while the fitness is still very present, on the community side, that was part of the shift that I had to go into, because I'd been in this space for so long, like really like we're building, and now we're not building in the same degree as we were before. And so part of the shift was connecting the idea of, okay, well, we built first, and now my role is helping to bridge so that all of the resources are in place. So now I don't have to spend as much time necessarily talking about the fitness, because we already built all that out.
Yeah.
At least an initial offering that people could connect to. So now I'm just going, let's talk about life. Let's talk about mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And here's some physical, that you can use as vehicles to help tap into that. So I'm just helping people connect to what we built more, which was certainly a challenge and sometimes a frustration in the building phase. Was I felt like I didn't have the time to help connect people to it more.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that community element was a recognition of where natural strengths are, a reflection and acknowledgement of what if that was the first sort of phase or chapter, what it is served and is now continuing to serve, but giving me the freedom to step into a new phase or chapter. And actually, speaking of chapters, that was a really interesting realization for me. And it happened as we were transitioning, like from 2022 to 2023, kind of in the new year. I realized I felt kind of off. Like I was trying to figure out what my space was. I was trying to figure out what the rhythm was. Usually throughout most of my life, I've had small periods of transition where I didn't really know what I was doing. Like, I need a break. Let's go high-rise window washing, which we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
But that those transition periods in the past have been very fast. They like flip very quickly. And then I have this like really specific direction, and then I pour all my energy in, and I've got my waypoint on the horizon, and I go. And as I transitioned into my new role at Onnit and the evolution, because Onnit in and of itself as a company is also continuing to evolve and how it engages with the world, and without losing the heart of what has made this place at Onnit like special and why so many people connect to it. So it took a little longer, and I was really cognizant of not trying to force, okay, what's the waypoint? It was more actually about just being in space. It was just more about being present. And it's not like I'm sitting back on my laurels and not doing anything and kind of being like, whatever, if it happens, it happens. No, I'm still very engaged, and I'm still very present and bringing the best of what I can bring in the context of where I'm at. But for me personally, I just didn't have this really sharp, clear point on the horizon that I was working towards. And that was different for me. It's just been a long time since I haven't really had that. Even in the shifts in various careers, like when it shifted, I had a point and it was like, go. And so I recognize that that's part of a new reality that I'm stepping into, because a question that I am asking of myself and of the universe and of source, and is, how do I step into my greater total human? What's my next step? What do I need to do? And the way everything has shifted and worked out, that has been part of the realization, was I needed to slow down a little bit. And I needed to slow down enough in order to be able to hear, absorb, or take in whatever it is that I need in order to grow to my next stage, whatever that ends up manifesting itself as further. And I've always been one, I always joked, because like I absolutely value meditation and stillness and quiet space. Like, the idea of the warrior by the waterfall sitting for like 30 days, and the Jedi like being able to tap into the force and stillness. Like I love all that. And the ninja warriors, like all of that. But I personally always had a really difficult time slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
I never felt disconnected from a sense of connection or a sense of being in a reflective, meditative state. So I always joked that I'm like, well, I meditate on the move. I'm not a sitter kind of meditation. And which makes sense that and I think we've spoken about this. I can't remember if we spoke about it on the podcast or not, but I go out for these solo walks into the wild,
Yeah.
and anywhere between 4 to 7 days. It's very minimal food, minimal water. It's just me and being out there. And most of the time, I almost never see anybody. The last one I did was a 7-day into Great Sand Dunes National Park, and I met one person, and I really felt like that one person connect was because we needed to meet each other. I needed to like meet her, but she needed to meet me. And she was this beautiful woman in her late 40s who was coming up on her 50th birthday and had completely changed how she walks through life and the history of what her family history is like. And who all, like, she was naming off all these examples of people in her immediate family and extended family and friends who were all died of heart attacks by like 50 and 55. And so she was like, I have this thing when I'm 50, I'm going to go to like South America and hike through Machu Picchu, and like all these things. And this connect that we had for a very short period, but like really meaningful conversation, was like almost like I was able to be a source of confirmation for her to just like, yeah, like go for it. This is amazing. And in the end, when we left, I gave her a hug, and it was strange because we were two strangers out in a national park. Like it was just odd. But then there was a point where I could just feel this sense of heart connection. And I'm like, only if you are comfortable with it, but you up for a hug? And she said, yeah. And I gave her a hug, and she just started crying. And I was just like, just go for it. You are doing so amazing. And for me, it was this really strong sense of connectivity of like why I go out for these walks, because I prefer, like, I like to just be out there alone because it helps me with my connection, but that the purpose is not to be alone. The purpose is for deeper connection in order to connect. And yeah, and it was just really awesome. And so I think of her very fondly. But so while I was out there, I'm walking. So this idea of, oh, I meditate on the move makes sense, that when I go for these, I'm walking, and every day I'm basically like moving most of the time. And so this last year, in combination, bringing this all back around, in combination with this idea of not having a waypoint and not like having this directed, forceful, like drive energy, it's been much more, reflective of a stillness, more of a just be here. And I connected with a practice through Chi Gong, which is something I've wanted to do for so long. But now it's just, all the timing and the components that are all lining up for me to just be able to like, okay, let's do this now. And through it, having a basically sitting and breathing practice. And I just focused on the breathing part, building internal energy and what that represents. And it didn't take long that I recognized, as it transitioned over, I'm like, oh, I'm now meditating when I'm in this space. Like this is a meditation practice in stillness. And I've been doing that for a little over a year now, and it has become very strong that I'm like, this isn't going anywhere. And while there was and is still so much value in meditating in movement, because if we think about it, whatever we gain out of meditating in stillness, we still move through this life. So how do we take what we've gained through meditating in stillness and carry that with us as we stay connected to that, moving through life? I see that has been a part of my journey, that I have been in training, working to like meditate on the move and try and stay connected, but there's still a certain limitation to it if I just do it in that format. And now I'm opening it up so that now what I'm doing is in stillness, I'm filling the well even greater so that I can carry that. I got the moving part down. Now it's the like, let's open up even further. And what does that look like when those two elements that can sometimes seem in contrast or a paradox are actually united, very much like your shirt, the yin and the yang, right? And working that duality, working in unity together, and what that represents. I'm still very early on this part, the stillness part. So we'll see what that looks like, but I'm already feeling the benefits of it and knowing that, no, this is now a part of my rhythm.
So I'm very curious about your meditation process and this stillness practice. What does that look like? Is it just a total acknowledging of what's arising and letting it go and being present in the moment, like in a place of just like not thinking, no thoughts, just an observance of what is, and then just letting that go? That's what I aim to do with my meditation, whether that be seated or in movement, just observing what is and letting it pass. But what does like meditation and stepping into that center look like for you?
So the way it looks like, and I haven't studied in depth specific meditation techniques, so I'm sure that anybody that listens to this and has studied, they're like, oh, that's X meditation practice, or a meditation practice. Like these are what you're doing. I'm like, that's cool. For me, what it's been, and it's not that I've been ignorant of meditation over the course of my life. I've been very aware. I think one of the things that I have heard spoken to in meditation is this idea of letting go of excessive attachment or judgment. And so when we get into a meditative state, there can be this sense of expectation of what the meditation is supposed to be like. And so we set up these parameters and go, oh, I'm going to be clear of mind. I'm going to be peaceful. I'm going to be all these things. And then we start to feel the ache in our knee from sitting there for like 5 minutes, or my foot's going asleep, or my back is starting to get sore, or the list of the shopping list I have to do, and all these things. And what ends up happening for a lot of people, as I have come to understand it, and I have certainly experienced that too, is this idea of like being overly attached to, wait, I'm not supposed to be thinking about these things. These things aren't supposed to be bothering me. These aren't. And then getting caught up in that. And so for me, I have had an awareness for some time that if you go into a meditative state, the idea of our thoughts, it's not to be overly attached to the thoughts, but to, like the clouds or weather moving through your space. They're not permanent, but the more focus we put on it, it's almost like we create greater density and it stays longer, as opposed to just letting the weather pass, which is similar to if you have a storm coming through. And if the storm comes through, the storm's just like watering all the plants. The storm is helping bring rebalance into the environment. And it's a good thing. And if we don't mind it, then it passes and you don't think about it. But if we do mind it, and we're like, oh, I'm getting all wet now, or oh, it's taking out the power, or oh, it's drowning out, whatever. That's our attachment to it. And it actually feels like it can extend the length in which that storm stays there. And even after the storm is gone, we're still holding on to the frustration or anger or sorrow, like whatever comes with it beyond after the weather's already passed. And so I've always, when I think about meditation, not always, but I've had an awareness for a long time that it's more about, just as it comes up, oh, it came up, fine. Now let it go. As it comes up, oh, great, fine. Let it go. And for me, my practice, the way it's turned out was I just focused on the breathing. So I went into it through a specific Chi Gong breathing practice that was focused around just breathe and concentrating on where is this breath going in your body as you're moving? How slow am I taking it in? How slow am I letting it out? Counting the breaths. And that was a really, really interesting exercise. I got to a point where I was able to like, okay, I can let go of the counting now. But the teacher that I had learned this from was had said, yeah, like count to 72 and like get in 72 breaths. And if you get to 20 and you are still breathing and you realize you've lost count, just start breathing, like just start over again and then go. For the first while, I was like 18, and then I'm breathing for a while and I'm going, oh, that was at 18. I don't know how long I've been breathing for. I lost count. So I go back to 1 and work my way up. And eventually getting to a point, what I recognized was that was a great practice to help the mind come back to where you're at and what you're doing. So then eventually I let go of counting and I would just set time. And that was really helpful for me because then I could just sort of really get into it. But then I would be really focused on the mechanics of my breathing and moving energy through my body. And then if I found myself distracted, along the way, then it was just come back to the mechanic of breathing and the direction of energy moving through my body. So that as I'm doing that, it was training my mind to come back to the present moment. And so I had a period of time where as things were coming up, it was really easy for me to just bring it back. It was like, oh, these thoughts are coming up, and I wouldn't even overthink it. And it could be something as silly as, not silly, but just as simple as, oh man, I have to remember, I got to take my motorcycle in for the oil change afterwards. And as soon as I realized I'm thinking that, it wasn't apparent that I transitioned into that thought process, but it came up. And then I would just go, oh, fine. And I would let it go and come back and just breathe. And so the breath was a really great anchor for that because it gave me something to come back to. Whereas if I had started purely as a meditative practice where I'm trying to overcome thought with thought, this was more, I'm overcoming a distraction of mind or thoughts with, again, the vehicle and going, oh, let me breathe. And that helped my mental space. And so through that process, then there came a point where it was like, oh, as things are coming up, just come back. But the point when I realized that I was like, oh, this is becoming meditation, like the higher purpose of meditation, as I'm coming to recognize and understand more deeply, is, and this is something that I've heard, through various spiritual practices, even in my own faith, in the Bahá'í Faith, that there is prayer and there is meditation. And the prayer is the asking for something, and the meditation is the receiving. So when you pray, you are asking, connecting to greater source, to God, to the universe, whatever that looks like for you, but you are praying for something and you are asking for it. But the receiving of it isn't actually in the process of prayer. That's the ask part. Then you have to like sit and be still and allow for whatever it is you're asking for to be received, whether it is a specific phrase, an image, a seed being planted of a thought, like whatever that might be, meditation is the receiving. And so for me, as I was deepening in this breathing practice and then kind of recognizing, oh, this is turning into like, I'm actually training my mind, which is one of the benefits of meditation. But then there came a point where things were coming up as I was sitting and breathing. And they were so clear and so sharp. And I have never received those. I usually, if I received something like that, it was on the move. But I have never received to the degree that I'm like, oh, I need to write this down because this is important, whatever it is moving forward. And that was when I realized that being in a practice of stillness and focusing on that breathing and the energy in my body and just opening myself more as a vessel, that's where some of the what I had been missing for some time. And that's when I realized it was turning into what I have come to recognize as like the form of what meditation is meant to be, which is to be able to receive. And so then when those thoughts come up, I don't come back to my breathing and try and let those go. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, sit with that. Let that run, whatever it needs to run. Breathe, like be grounded. And I almost then the breathing transition into where I use the breathing as a like to stay present so that this wouldn't disappear as like a thought that I could, I'm like, oh, I missed that. Dang, that was
Yeah.
so cool. And so now it serves it's shifted in what those look like. And yeah, so that's what my practice now looks like. I start off with prayer before I go into my breathing, most of the time. Sometimes if it's just, I'll dive into the breathing right away, but I've started with prayer and then I sit and I breathe. And sometimes there's nothing and it's just about the breath. And, half the time it's about letting all the jumble just like settle and let it go, come back to the breathing. But consistently doing that day in and day out, creating space for that stillness is allowing for reception and absorption. Then, yeah, I have stuff that comes up. And in that, it's giving me a different level of fullness to the direction that I'm moving in. And rather than having something, off in the distance that I'm like trying to propel myself to, I'm still moving in a direction, but there's a greater sense of like fullness as I do so.
Yeah, that's super fascinating to understand and to hear. Like I've never been much a man of faith as you are with the Bahá'í Faith, and so your explanation of prayer on how you're asking a higher power, a higher source for answers or clarity, and then using the practice of meditation to still yourself, to allow yourself to witness and receive that from a place of presence is really fascinating. It's something that I'm going to try to incorporate into my meditation practice. Um,
And
speaking,
one thought to put into that too, because I know, you have numerous listeners who also listen to this, and not everyone necessarily has a sense of connection to something greater. And that isn't a judgment or anything. That's just an acknowledgement of like how we process this life and this world based on our life experiences and what that means. In the end, I do have personally a belief and a sense that when this stage of our life is complete, then death is essentially simply a word that we have created for transition, and we will transition into the next stage of our life, albeit not necessarily of this physical representation, but that even if the idea of connecting to a greater source, wow, I will personally encourage each and every one to like see if you can, because it is such a support, and it is such a it is so uplifting to have a sense of something that is supporting and is connecting not only me to something greater, but to also to each other, and that there's a sense of purpose. But if to start, it's about, let me pray and let me say prayers to an inner knowing. Because I think many of us recognize that whether it's connected to something greater or whatnot, or bigger or outside of myself, it's simply going, I know when something feels right and when something doesn't. So there's this intuitive inner knowing. If you think of the practice of prayer as asking that inner knowing and then creating stillness, i.e., that meditative state, to then hear the answer or allow the knowing to come forward to support the distraction and, messing all over the place that's going on up here, then that in and of itself, I feel would be super valuable as well.
Thank you for that. So you just recently came back from a few really powerful trips. The first one was to the World Center of the Bahá'í Faith in Haifa, Israel, for a 9-day pilgrimage with your family. Do you want to speak a bit about that experience?
Yeah, I would love to. I'll probably start with a really quick introduction to the Bahá'í Faith, and it might help create a little more context for it. The Bahá'í Faith is one of the major religions of the world. It's a world-embracing religion and faith, and the founder is Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah came from Iran, and through a series of exile over 40 years ended up in Israel. And the Bahá'í Faith, its primary principle is unity. It's this idea of oneness. And so to look at it, the very basic but example that is at the core is the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of mankind. And this idea that the oneness of God means this idea of one God, that through religion, there has been this division or categorization or this idea of separateness. And oftentimes I have heard, people talking of like, what God do you pray to? Or who is your God? Or is that your God? But my God is God, like the God. And as Baha'is, we believe that it's just one God, that one ultimate creative source. And that the idea of oneness of religion is that all the religions are of God, and all the religions throughout history are of God. We believe in this principle of progressive revelation, and that is that God has sent down a prophet or manifestation of God throughout mankind's history to bring the message of God in the form that mankind was ready for at that time and needed at that time, to help us evolve, not just spiritually, because when we think religion, we think, oh, it's just the spirit, but spiritually, intellectually, materially, all these elements help move us forward as a civilization, as a world civilization. And that throughout history, God has sent down these manifestations of God, and or manifestations of himself or itself or herself, whatever word you use. And as Baha'is, we believe that Baha'u'llah is the newest manifestation for this day. So when I have conversations with folks who are like, oh, okay, but do you believe in Jesus Christ? Actually, I do. But do you believe in Muhammad? Do you believe in Buddha? Yes, I do. Because as a Baha'i, I am compelled to. Because I look at this idea of oneness and unity, and this idea that we keep having these messengers come, and that as these messengers, Moses and Zoroaster, as these messengers all come throughout history, they are all of the same capacity. They are entities unto themselves beyond anything that we can fully understand. The message is based on what we can handle, though. And so with each progressive revelation, there is a little more that's unlocked and opened as we are ready for it. Not that it diminishes the potency of any of those messages. And so the idea of all of those messengers being connected to one God, and that they are all a part of the same mission, that feeds down into the oneness of mankind. And that Baha'u'llah's revelation, the primary driving message, is unity and to bring us all together. And his revelation came about in the early to mid 1800s. And with that, if we look historically, we have seen spiritually, intellectually, materially, like, man, as a humankind, we have catapulted exponentially in this short couple of 100 years, more than we ever have in all of the history before. But each time a messenger came, it was the same thing. We catapulted in a way that had ever been before. And so unity is the driving force as Baha'is. And so when Baha'u'llah came, he was professing his message and who he was and what he was representing. This has been historically present, unfortunately, but is part of the process of all of the great messengers of the past. They ended up facing persecution at the hands of those who were either skeptical or those who had been in positions of power because of whatever they have been put in a position of from a previous message. And so the fear around losing that position of power, or what that would mean. And so, yeah, so he was exiled. He and his family and a number of followers were all exiled out of Iran into Iraq. And eventually, while being there, they thought that was it. They're going to crush this and we'll never hear of it again. But because the sincerity of the message was so real and so true, that it started transforming the relationships and it started transforming the communities in a positive way. And then there was fear of, oh, well, if it's so positive, they're going to look to him and not to us. We need to keep him going. So then they sent him into what is now known as Turkey. And then finally, and then the same thing happened. And then they got removed again until they came to actually Akka, Israel, which when Israel was part of the Ottoman Empire, this was like one of the worst prisons that anybody could get sent to. And it was where the worst of the worst criminals and everybody from the empire would get sent. And eventually, so they were in prison there, and then eventually were released, but stayed in Israel. And Akka is just down the road from Haifa, and Haifa is on Mount Carmel. And so as Baha'is, we are encouraged to go on pilgrimage at least once to the Holy Land, which is, both the spiritual and administrative world center for the Bahá'í Faith. And it's so interesting because for us to go on a pilgrimage, and we're encouraged to go on pilgrimage at least once in our life. I have the blessing, this is my third time now, and I'm going to keep going as much as I can. It is such a lift and such a connection. And what was interesting was that to think of it, for Baha'is to think of Israel as the Holy Land, and I grew up calling it the Holy Land, and then over time learning more about Christianity and learning more about Islam and learning more about Judaism, like they all call it the Holy Land too. And this round was the first time that we took some extra time to go, and we went to Jerusalem. And I really wanted to do that this time, especially because we were going with our kids. And I really wanted to have a sense, I wanted to learn more, but I also wanted to give the kids a sense of history and a sense of context before we went on pilgrimage, Baha'i pilgrimage, because the Baha'i faith isn't about isolationism, like it's not about, oh no, this is just our thing. It's this connectivity to progressive revelation and what that means. And so there were 11 of us. There was my wife and I, our 3 kids, and then there was my brother-in-law and his 3 kids, and the cousins. They're all like really tight. They grew up with each other for a number of years before we moved to Texas. And then my in-laws, my father and mother-in-law. And we went, and then we went over to Jerusalem, and we were going to spend more time. We had a few days set up to be able to spend a bit more time. But due to some of the contention in the area, there was a very strong suggestion that we don't stay anywhere close, just because it's so close to the border with Jordan. And had been stuff going on, and just play it by day, like take a day to go, but don't stay. So we ended up opting for that. And we had this amazing tour guide. He was so great. And he was a teacher. And so he's a Jewish man who is from England and eventually moved to Israel, to be in Israel, to be closer to source, and what that means. But as a teacher, that never went away. And so now what he does is he hires himself out on top of his other job, like as a tour guide, and he'll take people on tours. And I really was so thankful for him, because his approach was not one from any particular. He chose, even though he was Jewish and could speak to the Jewish perspective, he wasn't one to kind of go, this is just a tour just from the Jewish perspective. He had friends in Jerusalem and acquaintances that he knew that were also Christian, that were also Muslim, that were, and some other Jews that were of varying degrees of Jewish, they were explaining that there are various degrees to which you practice your faith. And so he had other Jewish friends that, practiced to different degrees than he did. And every time we went, and as we went through the quarters and went through all the different areas, we would come up, and there would be someone around, and he's like, give me a second. I just want to go ask, since they're here today, I want to go ask if they don't mind speaking with you. And then he would come back and he'd go, all right, yeah, they're happy to speak with you. He would bring us over, introduce us, and then he would walk away. And he explained after the first time that he did that, he was like, because I don't want to be here to influence the conversation. I want you to get it from their perspective, which I thought was so wonderful. And he had a wonderful curiosity. And when, and we were sharing what we were doing in Haifa or in Israel, and that we would be going to Haifa for Baha'i pilgrimage. And so he was asking more questions about the Baha'i faith as well, and for him getting context. But so my kids and my nieces and nephew, they're all teenagers now. And so this was such an incredible opportunity to see in real time, especially of people who are like living in real time in such close proximity, i.e. between the Christian, the Jewish, and the Muslim faith in this walled in small city. But that for all of them, this was one of, if not the most holy place in the world for them. And yet there was still this sense of friction. And while there were tensions or friction, we see it from the outside, blown up in much bigger proportion. Everyone in Jerusalem living together, even though there may be a little bit of tension, they're all finding a way to coexist and still respect that this is each group's also most holy space. And so I just saw in real time this idea of progressive revelation, like all in a really close proximity, and that this idea that we're all essentially moving towards this idea of oneness and connectivity to the most great source. So to go from that then to Haifa, which for us was our 9-day pilgrimage, was beautiful and just gave a really strong sense of like history and spiritual thought, like theology and whatnot from different perspectives, and then to have the Baha'i perspective, which looks from this place of unity and how all of those fit in. And so, yeah, so Haifa is, and Akka, because we go between those two places, are such a beautiful experience, and we see everything from the places in which they were imprisoned and the dire circumstances that they were in, and yet still continuing with this understanding of unity and oneness to be of service and to work towards this greater ideal, that even though the significant figures of the Baha'i Faith at that time were working towards something that they knew they would never see the fruition of, and we're continuing to see the fruition of. And you see these old pictures of the current Baha'i, like the temple grounds. They have these amazing gardens. The government of Israel has referred to the Shrine of the Bab and the terraces that have been built on Mount Carmel as one of the, like, the 8th wonder of the world. They use it for their tourism. Like they're like, come and check out the Baha'i gardens because this is going to blow your mind. And from our side, you know, it's this idea that it is a reflection of beauty and peace and connectivity, and a symbol for coming together and what that can mean if we work towards that idea of oneness.
Mm-hmm. And for someone listening and they're curious to learn more about the Baha'i Faith, like where does one delve into that faith?
The best
How
place
does he begin?
The best place probably to start, I would say, would be Baha'i.org. So it's BAHAI.org. And if you go to Baha'i.org, it has the whole introduction and direction to the writings, because like I can speak to it, but there is something about connecting to the very writings. And we have, for the most part, like for the first time in history, writings that are written in the hand by the messenger of God, whereas before, due to our not being ready, you know, those things they were disseminated, but they were written by man. This is written by the messenger and those that are significant members of continuing the Baha'i Faith afterwards. And they're really beautiful words and practical. I think that's one of the things I'd like to, you know, just wrap that up on, because I think when people hear, oh, unity, like it sounds like utopia and like this ideal, but is that really the reality of the world we live in and everything? And growing up, it was interesting because it's like, yeah, we are working to this ideal of oneness and a place where we don't have to fight and we don't have to be in contention. Now, when we reach that, who knows? It's this idea of working towards it. Baha'u'llah, oftentimes people will, not oftentimes, but I've certainly had times where people will sort of challenge this idea where they may feel like the messenger that they have connected with is sort of like they're it, and there's nothing really beyond that. And then when they ask, and through asking, I share this idea of progressive revelation, and go, oh, well, then is Baha'u'llah supposed to be the last one? Like, is there no? And I said, no, Baha'u'llah has spoken that there are going to be more that are going to come. There is an idea that it won't come until before 1,000 years has passed, but there's more, because if this whole idea of progressive revelation is meant to continue to move us forward, then there's going to need to be more to help us along and continue expanding on that message. So for me, while there's this idea of unity, and who knows how long we'll get to this stage where that ideal is realized, it is a very practical faith. And so it really looks at like, what are the building blocks of society? And that's one of the biggest things that Baha'u'llah brought with his message, is an example of the building blocks in which society can continue to evolve. We look at very practical things like the equality of men and women. What's really funny is that if you say that now, people are like, yeah, that makes absolute sense. There's nothing revelatory about that. When that message got brought, that was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And the unity of the equality of science and religion, and this idea that science and religion are each in their own silos, but the Baha'i Faith talks about needing to find an integration between the two, because each fills a piece for the other. And and just like practical means of moving forward. So for me, that has always been that has always spoken to truth for me, in the practicality of, it's not some kind of like woo-woo, like, oh, it's all this, we're going to utopia and this ideal, and we're just going to ignore what's going on. No, like, we have to work towards it. And that was something that was re-highlighted while I was on pilgrimage, was one of the characterizations, or one of the characteristics of the Baha'i revelation, is crisis and victory. And we can see that being reflected in the world, that it's not just victory upon victory upon victory. We go through immense crisis. Like, there are things in the world that are happening that are not cool, and that are, and no one would wish that. But it is the galvanizing force that helps propel us into what those victories will look like. And there are plenty of examples that come to mind, but I'll just name one that really came to mind because I saw it the other day, and it's relevant to right now, but the fires in Hawaii that were going on. And that if we think about what this is, and it's terrible. I'm not saying that, like, no, we don't still need to help and support, and people shouldn't still be feeling sad or upset or all those things. That's a part of going through a crisis. But there was this really beautiful, I follow the pro surfer Kai Lenny, and I happened to see it pop up. I was on Instagram for a moment, and his post had come up on my feed, and they had a gathering circle out in the ocean. And so the people of Hawaii will do this, where they'll come out on their surfboards and they'll celebrate, the life of somebody who has passed, or come together for a healing around something that has happened. And he said, this is the biggest circle I have ever seen, or that I have heard from my parents or grandparents. Like, this is the biggest we've ever held. And it was the idea, what really reflected to me was, there it is, crisis and victory. There was the burning down of their area of Hawaii, and then the things that are going on around, well, who owns the property and who's going to be able to, like, get their homes back, and all of those types of things. And out of that propelled this greater degree of oneness, of gathering, of people setting aside whatever differences they may have had within their own community, and coming together to go, no, we need to stand up as one for something greater than whatever, the stuff was going on before. So from the Baha'i perspective, that idea of, that's what characterizes this revelation, is the recognition of, no, there's still going to be plenty of hard. It's not just we step into some utopia, and the hard is a part of the process. to force us, to like move us to have to make a choice to work towards the better, the victory. And that if we work through that and we recognize that the hard is a function of helping us do that, then, like when you're just given something, it doesn't mean the same as when you've earned something.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, yeah, so that's a big element of the Baha'i faith. And yeah, and if you go and check out on Baha'i.org, really great place to start. And whoever listens to this podcast ever wants to have a conversation, I'm always happy to share.
There's one last thing that I want to chat about, if we still have time. It's about your adventure retreat in El Vallé, Dominican Republic, that you just got back from. You were teaching there with John Wolf and a lot of other educators. And I would just love to learn about that experience and the community formed there and what you took away from that experience and the mastermind talks you guys engaged in.
Yeah, so being down in El Valle was just a really beautiful opportunity. And it's cool that we're like going to wrap up on this because it brings it back to what we were talking about in the meditation. And I don't know that I would have ended up in the DR if it hadn't been for being in a space where I could receive and absorb through the meditation. And in the spring, this last spring, during one of my breathing meditation sessions, I was hit very, very strongly with a very clear message of an experience that I'm supposed to bring. And it's something that's been on my mind for years. I could easily say decades. Just this idea of, oh man, I'd love to run a retreat. Like, what does that look like? And run an experience. And I think any experience that I've been through in the past, even as a teenager or, that are run by other people, I've always had this thing, even as a camp counselor. I remember there were some, I would facilitate a particular week-long course for kids. And I'm like a 16-year-old kid doing this for all these other like little smaller kids. But I just love that idea of putting together an experience that from the beginning to the end would create a shift in people to make them more open to more. And as you've experienced, that's a big part of what went into the Onnit certifications, the fitness certifications. And we always joke because people coming out the end of those 2 days would be like, wait, I came here for a fitness certification and I'm leaving, like this was a personal transformation course. And John and I joked, we're like, yeah, this is actually a personal transformation course wrapped up in the vehicle of a fitness offering.
Absolutely.
And so this idea of running an experience or a retreat or something of its like has been in the back of my mind for a long time. And each year it kind of it still always felt like, oh, at some point, it didn't feel like now was the time. And this last spring, in that meditation and receiving, it was, now is the time. Now is the time to start. And it laid out. And that was what I was talking about earlier in the meditation of like, as this stuff is coming in, I'm not shutting it off trying to get back to my breathing. I'm like, I let it sit there while I'm breathing. And I use the breathing to anchor me as this unfolds. And as soon as I was done, because I do it for certain periods of time, as soon as it was done, like I started writing and it laid itself out. It gave me like the number of days. It gave me the general format of what I would do. It even started like names, like not just names, but who this would be for, and names that were dropping in and going, you need to offer this to these names. And I kind of came out of that session and writing it all down, kind of going like, whoa, what is this? Okay, I need to pay attention. And I kept feeling like as I would get closer to the pilgrimage, that would sort of help me sort some of that out. But before that happened, I realized I was like, all right, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this in the next year, I need to start talking to some people and just asking folks who I know that have done retreats or run experiences about some of the logistics of how they go about running that, what they've thought about different places. And one of the first ones that came to mind were AJ Londo and Georgie Boynton. And AJ and Georgie are two people who have been coming to our Onnit fitness certifications for some years. And AJ was at the very first one that had ever been done and had been back multiple times. You know AJ and Georgie because they were down there for the filming of Foundations when you guys were all there for that. Yeah. And so they had been running these retreats for the last couple of years, and I'd seen some things. I'm not like super prolific on social media, so I don't always catch everything that's going on, but I had seen that they were running these retreats. And in my mind, I thought, oh, they're go to Costa Rica. I'll have to ask them. I just kept thinking it was Costa Rica. So I'll have to ask them about it and like what it's like and who they work with and everything. And then it was like, no, we go to the Dominican Republic. And in that moment, something kind of went just clicked. And I thought, man, Dominican Republic has not been on my radar at all for like thinking about doing something like this. So whenever things like that come up, I see that as a possible sign. It's like, now pay attention. And the fact that this came up that I didn't know, even though they've been doing this for 2 years, that for some reason in my head it was Costa Rica, that the time when it is made aware, like that I am aware that it's the Dominican Republic, is when I have this really clear, it's time to run this thing, was a very big sign for me that I was like, oh, I need to go check this out. And so through that, had a chance to chat with them. And and funny enough, another big sign, I was calling John Wolf on the call because, we always make sure we link up every couple of few weeks and no matter what's happening in our lives and whatnot. And yeah, I called him and he answered his phone and he was like, and it was a little staticky. And he's like, hey, Shane, I'm just in the Dominican Republic right now.
Oh, wow.
And that I was like, what?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
What are you doing answering my call if you're in the Dominican Republic? But they were just about to get on a bus and he didn't really have reception because you don't when you're down there. You have very little reception because it's kind of out there. But he was like, yeah, they're like up high in this one area on one of the mountains and they were about to get in this bus. And he's like, I happen to have reception right now and your call came through. So I'm listening. I'm like, okay, there's something about the Dominican Republic. And so I eventually got on a call with AJ and Georgie and they shared with me what was more important than what they shared with me about, the retreat experience itself, was about the vision that they had in cooperation with the people who are there locally around creating something meaningful for people to have a deeper dive in their lives and to experience the power of nature as it is in that space, the ocean and the jungle. And like, there's a lot of, I've been in places in nature around the world in a few places, and you can feel it when you're in a place. And there was something here for sure. When I was there, I could feel it, but they were speaking to that. And then finding a way to help open it up for more people to come to connect to this while not turning it into an overrun ecotourism, like Cancun kind of experience. That it's still done in a way that is in connection with nature to help people connect to nature in a deeper way while exploring this idea of adventure for themselves and supporting the people that are there locally and the local economy and everything like that. So that was what really spoke to me, because here are the principles of things we've been talking about this whole podcast. being expressed in action in this place. And I was like, if I am to do something like this and to run this experience, yeah, I could go, and not that I won't go, to Costa Rica or anywhere else, but this idea of if I could do it in a place that has a greater sense of purpose and meaning, then why wouldn't I? So I was like, okay, this is all happening. All these conversations are happening in the span of like 4 weeks or so, 5 to 4 weeks, right before I go on pilgrimage. And I was like, okay, while on pilgrimage, I'll kind of absorb that and see. But yeah, it was very clear. I was like, yeah, I think I need to go. And so when I got back, which was only a month away was it even a month away? A month? Yeah, 3 weeks. Yeah, it was a month to going to the DR. And so work that out. And over the course of chatting, originally it was going to be, I'm going to come down. I'm going to take some time with AJ, Georgie, and John, because John is involved in this now as well. And then I wanted to meet the people that were there on the ground locally, get a sense of the environment. I knew I wouldn't have 4 to 7 days, but I wanted to take a little bit of time to go for a walk, as I do out in nature, to kind of feel and absorb. And then as we got closer, like what they said was, well, we have a retreat that's happening. Like, we would love for you to be take part in whatever capacity that you want to take part in the retreat. And I have to be really honest. I was like, I'm not really feeling a retreat experience. I'm not feeling like I need to go on a retreat for myself right now. What I need to do is I need to go connect. I need to go. But I recognized that being a part of the retreat and taking that in was a part of what I was doing, and finding space to be able to contribute. And that was how AJ and Georgie and John had all said it. They were like, we would just love to have the contribution of your energy in that space with the folks that are there. And I was like, yeah, I can totally do that. And the schedule worked out that we did that for about 5 days. And then there were a couple days where they continued in Santo Domingo. And at that point, it just felt like a natural transition where I'd stay back for a couple days and go do my walk.
Amazing.
And they were all excited for that. They're like, okay, yeah, that works. That look at that. The universe is giving everybody, what they need going into this. And so, yeah, on top of just being there and being supportive of the mastermind and being supportive of the retreat itself, and then offering a session, because that came to mind. I was like, if you guys want, I'd love to offer a session for the group. And so, because I do have a background and training in free diving, I was like, that's kind of adventure elements, and I could teach a session around how to increase your breathing capacity to then be able to dive into bodies of water and explore more. And with that, though, for me, I was like, and then how do we come back and connect to the idea of what breath represents, of what not breathing represents physiologically and mentally and emotionally, and what the environment of water represents, and the connectivity in water, and that learning to hold our breath in water creates this beautiful synergy of stillness while being embraced and supported. And so that was how, I presented that. And yeah, just really being there. So I really felt immersed, and this really, really beautiful experience with these amazing people. And the highlight of it was the connection. It was the connection with people. And I told AJ and Georgie this because I have had the honor of being in the role of a coach, a mentor, and to contribute and support to their journeys. John and I both have, to their journeys. And I told them, I was like, part of being here is also this incredible opportunity to celebrate what they have taken from anything that we had to offer and give that forward. You know, for them, of the 5 pillar principles of the Onnit education system, you had asked me earlier if we could, you know, maybe we bring this one up. And from some of the things we talked about in this podcast, you may hear a connection to certain things we've chatted about, while it wasn't the driving force. But unity in diversity, search for truth, balance in harmony, action is leadership, give to empower. Those are the 5 pillar principles put together for presentation in our Onnit Fitness certifications, and what has been continued to be absolutely confirming that we did everything to the best of our ability in those certs, and that they really did serve as a vehicle, is that now, a few years since we've been teaching them regularly, and in any conversation with anyone who took it, almost to a T, nobody talks about the fitness part. They all bring up the 5 pillar principles. And I was like, those served, you know, they served what they were meant to serve as a vehicle. And so I was seeing all 5 of these being reflected in what AJ and Georgie were doing. And for them, their primary anchor principle that they were connected to was give to empower. And I told them, in whatever role that I have been able to serve as coach or mentor, it is an absolute gift to watch you give to empower to other people. And it isn't, as you know, the idea of give to empower isn't simply giving to empower that individual, but giving to empower that individual to give. And they were doing that. And I told them, full circle, you are doing that for me and for John, and that you are continuing through your action to empower the both of us to continue in our next stages of what we continue to bring. And that was a really beautiful thing to see, you know. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that, you know, that's what you're doing with this podcast. Is you, and I know through our conversations over the years, you have continued to embrace those pillar principles and manifest those in your life, and how you conduct yourselves and the energy that you bring to other people. And by being able to have this podcast and do these interviews, you create a platform and an opportunity for ideas and thoughts and energy to go to the people who are listening. But you are also giving each and every one of us who are on doing this interview the beautiful opportunity and gift of being able to continue to express ourselves. And as we work some of these ideas out with your very mindful questions, I've always appreciated that. All your questions are so very poignant, very thoughtful, that like it's helping me process and work some of this stuff out. And it makes it easier for me to take that back into my work. And I know that you do that for all your guests.
Intentionally.
So yeah, so for that, for me, is like so huge and revitalizes me in like, okay, we did what we were supposed to be doing. We are doing what we are supposed to be doing. And we are continuing to, like, you know, dominoes. We're hitting the dominoes in all these different directions to help elevate this vibration of humanity, which to me is very resonant with my connection to the Bahá'í Faith and the message of what the Bahá'í Faith has been talking about. Because I'm like, that's what we're all doing. We're all working towards bringing this up. And so it was a wonderful experience. And Adventure Retreat, which is their team and what they're bringing, AJ and Georgie did say this last one, this was their 5th one. And they said that it made a leap, this last one. It did something different and highlighted more of what they want to bring in future retreats. And I believe that it is a wonderful space for anybody that gets an opportunity to take part. El Valle is very special and a wonderful opportunity to go there if you have, and to meet with the people that are there doing wonderful things. And yeah, and so then at the end of that, I went out for my walk, which ended up being almost 2 days, not quite, about 30 or so hours. But I went out into the jungle, and for this one, I ended up going fasted. So I just had my water with me. And as always, I get a starting point, and then I get nudged in the direction I'm supposed to go. And in those directions, I am given insight of things moving forward. But maybe that's for another conversation.
Well, I look forward to that future conversation. It's just been a real pleasure to reconnect and to hear about what you've been up to as of late, and the gems that you shared. I'd just like to leave the floor for you to close with any last words of wisdom or whatever compels you in this moment, just to anyone who has been listening with us in this conversation.
I think what comes is right now is gratitude. This is my third podcast with you, and the Welcome to the Winner's Circle. And I am just so grateful for my life. I am so grateful for my faith. I am so grateful for the world and the opportunity that it provides each and every one of us to step into the potential of our greatest selves. And in that world, I am so grateful for the immense, deeply felt, on a heart level connection that I have with incredible people like you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. To close every episode, we'll bring it in a choice to step into the winner's circle. Boom. Thank you so much, Shane. They can connect with you on your website, shaneheins.com, or on IG at Shane Heins. Thank you so much. I look forward to chatting with you again as this show keeps on rolling.
Yes, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.